Yeah, so basically Balin walked into a 5-year death trap thinking that he was headed for a real estate win. We're breaking down the logistics of a failed reclamation and what really happened in Moria before the Fellowship arrived. To understand why Balin even tried this, you've got to realize that for dwarves, Moria isn't just a mine, but the ancestral equivalent of a winning lottery ticket that you drop down a drain. By the time The Hobbit wrapped up, the dwarves were already riding a massive high from reclaiming Erebor, and Balin basically thought, why not go for double? He pulled together a crew of veterans, some of which you'll remember from the quest for the Lonely Mountain, and they didn't just sneak in. They rolled up to the East Gate, cleared out the local orc squatters, and actually made it work for a while. For the first year, the reclamation looked like a genius move. They found Durin's axe, they found a stash of Mithril, and Balin officially set up his throne in the Chamber of Records. If you were a dwarf on Middle-earth at that time, the Moria project looked like the best investment on the map. But this is where the logistics of the Longbeard hubris started to clash with the reality of living in a mountain that had been marinating in darkness for 1,000 years. Everything was going perfectly until they started diggy hole and going deeper. The true terror of Moria was waiting for them to make one fatal mistake. It wasn't like Balin was just looking for a new place to take a nap. He was chasing the ghost of a superpower. Moria had been a dark no-go zone for 1,000 years after Durin's Bane cleared the place out. A millennium is a really long time, long enough for the terrifying reality of the Balrog to turn into a vague legend, but just not long enough for the dwarves to forget about the massive wealth left sitting in those halls. Naturally, the goals were ambitious. They were hunting for the Arkenstone of Moria, essentially Durin's axe, and of course the Mithril. For the first couple of months, it looked like they actually pulled it off. They cleared the East Gate, sent the local orcs running, and began uncovering ancestral treasures that hadn't been seen in ages. Balin even took the title Lord of Moria, which on paper was a massive PR win for the Longbeards. They were finding the old armories and getting the fortress back online, feeling like they had finally reclaimed their birthright. But that early success was a little bit of a trap. They were celebrating a victory in a massive complex they didn't fully control, and as they pushed further into the lower levels, they were about to realize that some shadows are better left undisturbed in the dark. While Balin was busy, celebrating on his new throne, an ancient and malevolent force was slowly stirring in the deep, preparing to turn their golden dream into a waking nightmare. See, the thing about Moria is that it's a geographical nightmare. It doesn't just sit on the surface. It's buried at the roots of the mountains. By chasing that silver vein, Balin's people were essentially tunneling deeper into the one place they should have been avoiding at all costs. Really makes you wonder what they were thinking. Did they know the Balrog was down there? The short answer is, they knew something was. The dwarves had a name for it, Durin's Bane. But after 1,000 years, that name had become more of a campfire story than an actual tactical warning. See, dwarven stubbornness is a powerful drug, and the sight of raw Mithril probably made them believe they could handle whatever was lurking in the basement. But as they pushed those mines further down, the vibe in the colony shifted. The scent of gold that had fueled their first year was replaced by the unmistakable stench of orcs. They weren't just fighting a single demon, they'd accidentally rang the dinner bell for every goblin tribe in the Misty Mountains. Suddenly, the logistical reality set in. They were a small group of settlers in a massive, porous fortress, and they had just invited the neighbors to a war that they couldn't win. The pickaxes finally fell silent as the colony realized that they weren't the hunters anymore, but the prey in a massive tomb that was about to be sealed shut. When Gandalf picked up the Book of Mazarbul in the movies, it felt like a dramatic prop. But in the lore, that thing is an absolute black box flight recorder for a disaster. It was a messy, blood-stained diary that cataloged exactly how the hope of the dwarves was systematically dismantled. One of the most heartbreaking details was the fate of Óin. After the eastern gate was overrun and the colony was pushed back, he took a group to the western door, the doors of Durin, only to find the water had risen. He was taken by the Watcher in the water, which is a massive detail because it meant the back door was officially locked. They were trapped on both sides, one with a monster in the lake and the other with an army of goblins. If you look at the handwriting in the book, it tells the whole story without needing a translator. It started out as a formal chronicle of a new kingdom, but by the end it was just frantic and jagged scribbles. The final entry, famously written by Ori, shifts from the "we are holding the hall" to the chilling realization that there was no escape. They were recording their own extinction in real time while the drums began to echo from the deep. With the exits blocked and their leaders dead, the survivors were left staring at a darkness that had finally decided to finish what had started centuries ago. One of the biggest questions people have is how Gimli could be so oblivious. He walked into Moria expecting a feast, while the reality was a tomb that had been cold for 5 years. I guess look at the no news is good news fallacy of the Third Age. In Middle-earth, communication was never really instant. There was no "you up" text that you could send up a mountain range. If a messenger didn't return from an expedition, you didn't immediately assume that they had all been slaughtered. You assumed the mountain is rich, the work is hard, and they're simply too busy mining to raid home. For Gimli and Gloin, this was more than naivete. It was a desperate need for a win. The dwarves had seen their influence shrinking for many centuries, and now the reclamation of Moria was supposed to be the ultimate comeback story. Admitting that the expedition had completely failed meant admitting that the greatest city of their people was permanently lost to the shadow. Gimli's hope was a shield against the fading of his race. He wanted to believe the silence meant prosperity, and that's not because he was a fool, but because the alternative was too devastating to accept until he saw the dust on the stone with his own eyes. While the silence in the mountains felt like peace to the outside world, it was actually the quiet of a graveyard waiting for the next footfall. Now, the irony of Balin's failure is that it accidentally saved the world. If his expedition hadn't left behind the book, Gandalf would have been navigating a maze with zero intel. Those bloodstained pages gave the Fellowship the exact layout of the tragedy, allowing them to understand the stakes before the drums even started beating. It's a grim legacy, for sure, but a vital one. And it really does leave us with the ultimate question. Was Balin a hero trying to restore a lost culture, trying to reclaim what his people had lost? Or was he just another victim of the same old dwarven greed that had woken the shadow in the first place? It also makes you wonder how things would have been different if they wouldn't have woken up the Balrog and things wouldn't have gone so bad so fast. Just imagine those dwarves retaking Moria, firing up the fortress again, and arming people in the fight against Sauron. It could have made an interesting difference. Anyway, what are your thoughts? Let us know what you think in the comments down below.